All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Welcome to the ACLU of New Mexico Interim Legislative Training. I am Naomi Valdez, and I'm super happy to be with you all this evening. So we're just going to start off tonight with a question about what brought you here today. So interested to know, Dakota will be popping up this poll for you all to go ahead and answer. Dakota, if you'll go ahead and get that up, everybody will just fill that out. Interested to know what brought you here. So if you want to jump in and do what you can, if you're not sure yet, but want to learn more about the process, you just want to see what the ACLU of New Mexico is up to these days, and we're happy to update you on that. Or you heard there might be snacks, and if that's the case, sorry to disappoint. All right, can we get those results up, Dakota? Interested to see what brought folks here this evening. Fantastic. Got a group of doers on. So happy to see that the majority of folks want to jump in and do what they can. And we're really, really interested in making sure that everybody gets the most out of their time here tonight. And if it's just here to get updates and you want to learn more, we are happy to have you. So moving on, thank you again for being here. Let me go and close this out. So I am going to go ahead and start with introductions. We have the majority of our policy team here today. I'll start with myself. My name is Naomi Valdez. I am the Director of Public Policy for ACLU New Mexico, and I will send it to Dakota.
Hi, everybody. I am Dakota Watterson. I'm the Reproductive Rights Community Engagement Specialist here, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am going to pass it to Elaine.
Hey, everybody. Elaine Maestas. I'm the Police Accountability Strategist with the ACLU of New Mexico, and I'll pass it over to Miss Maggie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie Sariano. I'm an organizer central to our criminal legal system work. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Thanks for being here, and I'll pass it to Baron.
Yes, folks, hi. My name is Baron Jones. I see a lot of names I recognize. I'm happy you all are here. I'm the Senior Policy Strategist here at the ACLU of New Mexico, and I'm really pleased to be here back in touch with folks. And we have one person who isn't here today, who put so much work into this project and can't be here tonight. That's Maria Coronado. She's our Immigrant Rights organizer in Las Cruces. And also we have one more staff member that I need to pass it to, and that is Nia. Excuse me, Nia.
Hi, Baron. Thank you so much. Yes, Nia Rucker. I'm the Policy Council and Regional Manager of the ACLU office in Las Cruces, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
Thank you so much, everybody. And Baron, if you want to take it over, we're going to start with some general updates.
Yeah, so as most of the folks on the call know, for the last, 50, almost 60 years, the ACLU has worked to protect and expand civil rights and liberties for our most marginalized communities here in the state. In the last few years, our advocacy work has centered around primarily 4 strategic priorities, right? We have done a lot of great work in the immigrant rights and field. We have done great work in the reproductive rights and justice area. And we also work with police accountability and ending mass incarceration. And like most folks on the call, life has been like a serious challenge since March 2020, when the first public health orders went into effect. But despite all the obstacles created by the pandemic and us working and navigating from home, us doing double duties of raising families and keeping our advocacy going. This has been one of the most successful years in the affiliate's 60-year history. And the reason I say that is because we work with unlikely partners across the ideological spectrum, political spectrum, to pass the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. And that is one of that bill is huge for the state of New Mexico and New Mexicans because it allowed folks to bring cases in New Mexico State District Court if they believe that their civil rights has been violated. Before this law went into effect July 1st, 2021, the only option was for New Mexicans to file cases in one of the 3 district courts, federal district courts throughout the state, where they were often sometimes be met with the burden of qualified immunity, right? So, and we'll probably have some courses about that later. We also brought to a close a multi-year campaign to repeal a outdated 52-year-old abortion ban that criminalized providers. And as you all know, like I know the folks on the call are aware of this, with what's going on nationally and across the state, abortion rights are in constant attack. And there's going to be cases up in the Supreme Court here and coming up soon that could really overturn access for folks, and we don't want to see that happen. We also did some great work here and also brought it into another multi-year campaign, and that was with the passage of the Elizabeth Whitfield End of Life Options Act. We've worked with several years to get similar legislation passed, and we finally created access for terminally ill New Mexicans to end their lives with dignity without the pain and the suffering. So that's a sort of great boon. And the last one, the bill that went into effect happened in a special session, but that was the Cannabis Regulation Act. And that bill is just going to be really, it's sort of even the playing field. And the ACLU is working closely with the city of Albuquerque to make sure there are equity provisions in that bill that calls for the reinvestment in the communities most harmed by our war on drugs and our penchant for tough on crime policies. We also worked on a couple other bills that's worth mentioning. We worked to try to and driver's license suspension for failure to pay fines and fees, because we know without driver's license, folks can't support themselves and their families, and that's really important. We worked to pass a statewide use of force bill because in New Mexico here, the violence exacted by our law enforcement communities is a little bit out of hand, and we need to bring an end to that. And I'm maybe forgetting also, and Mia and the folks in our southern office put in a Herculean effort to end to bring a moratorium on private prisons in the state of New Mexico. And while we didn't see those bills signed into law, we set a serious foundation to move those things forward in future years. And the last little update I'll mention is that, when I first joined ACLU, I think Will Ware is on the call. Wish I could see your face, that smile, Will. But that was my very first, sort of advocacy training when I met Will Ware and Tom Kovac. And we had about 21 employees then. And I just did the count on our website now, and I think we're up to 27, and we're about to hire a couple more people. And what that has allowed us to do is just expand our scope of work, right? We have an indigenous rights attorney who's not only, doing great work here in New Mexico, but he's focused on, uplifting indigenous rights to be a nationwide priority at the ACLU, which we know is really long overdue. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to Elaine, who will go over a few the legal updates.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Baron. The ACLU of New Mexico's legal team has been busy safeguarding and advocating for New Mexican civil rights across the spectrum. Some of our cases that our legal team is working on include suing the Albuquerque Public Schools after one of the teachers referred to a student as a bloody Indian. We filed suit against the New Mexico Corrections Department for its failure to keep inmates safe during the pandemic by making sure that they have had access to soap and cleaning supplies. We are currently waiting for the New Mexico Supreme Court to rule on that case. And finally, we are representing a 17-year-old student who was arrested and held for about a week on a faulty arrest warrant for murder. The arrest of our client was based solely on an APD officer sending a picture without the name of the student to an APS resource officer. The APS resource officer indicated that the picture was our client, even though our client's name did not match the name that APD had of the person who was involved in the murder. And you can find more in-depth case details on our webpage or in our guide. And I also want to add that if you all need any legal help, you can fill out our legal complaint form on the website. And I will be kicking it off to Maggie for redistricting.
Okay, yeah, so every 10 years, every decade, we have the process redistricting. Our legislative and our other districts are redrawn to account for the changing population patterns across the states. And this is from our Census Bureau data collected last year and part of this year early on. This has a major impact on our communities and through the policies, and it reshapes, it can reshape our lives, right? From like important resources such as funding for our schools and infrastructure, along with the makeup of our democracy, are all at stake. In New Mexico, this process is guided by the Citizens Redistricting Committee, which meets together to collect public comment, public input on how the new maps might be drawn. And this is a crucial moment for our communities, especially those who have historically been disenfranchised and disempowered through the redistricting process. Currently, our Indigenous Justice Team is working closely with the tribes and pueblos to ensure their interests are considered as maps are being proposed. We also have worked to drive turnout for public comment at the Citizens Redistricting Committee meetings, and we are supporting the work of our partners that are knee-deep in the effort to ensure equity and fair representation are kept central, are central to the redistricting process moving forward. Lastly, and equally as important, we are working to end prison gerrymandering with the National Voting Rights Project. This practice exploits the presence of our most vulnerable, the people incarcerated. It does not give them a voice in our democracy. And it's essential that the legislator supports maps that represent Hispanic and Native communities across New Mexico. And I will.
Thanks so much, Maggie, and everybody for the updates. A couple of things that I would like to note here. So we have Dakota dropped the link for our guide for interim advocacy work. And if everybody wants to take a look at that, download it, keep it handy. This guide is meant to be a resource for you all in the coming months, and hopefully it will serve its purpose. It also has contact information for some of our staff and organizers. So if you have any questions or you want to get more involved after having attended this training, please don't hesitate to reach out and definitely take a look at that resource. So appreciate everybody's updates. With that, we will go to Nia for an update on our Indigenous justice work.
The ACLU of New Mexico's Indigenous Justice Team is working with Native allies on education legislation for the 2022 legislative session. We believe this is one of the most important ways that restorative justice for the Indigenous community can take place here in New Mexico. Currently, there are 4 bills that our Indigenous Justice Team is working to build to support during this interim session. HB 84, HB 85, HB 86, HB 87. These bills address various aspects of educational and community inequities, public school funding, culturally responsive policies, educational sovereignty, and funding for community-based support systems that are all covered in this potential legislation. If you are interested in learning more about these bills, you can reach out to me directly, and I will put you in touch with the appropriate team member. Also, we're excited to announce that the ACLU of New Mexico will be expanding its Indigenous Justice Program in the coming months. In a multi-affiliate project that currently includes 4 other states, we will be building out our on-the-ground long-term program that puts impacted communities at the forefront of making meaningful change and supporting the work that existing organizations have been doing.
Thank you so much, Nia. Some very exciting developments in our Indigenous Justice program. Really excited. So I have a trivia question for folks. We want to keep everybody engaged with us this evening. And our trivia question is a true or false. Helen Keller was one of the founding members of ACLU. Is that true or false? And Dakota, if you'll just pop that up for me when we get enough answers. All right. 71% of people were correct. That is true. Helen Keller was part of a progressive movement in the early 1900s that fought for the rights of workers, African Americans, and women. And she supported women's suffrage, access to birth control, and unions. So she, in 1920, was one of the founding members of the American Civil Liberties Union. So fun fact, and definitely a woman ahead of her time. Thanks for participating in that one, folks. With that, we will go to Dakota, who is going to be giving us an update on reproductive rights and justice.
You're muted, Dakota.
You're on mute, Dakota.
Of course, only been working with Zoom for like a year and a half, but in New Mexico, it is critical to continue our proactive and defensive legislative work to protect and expand access to reproductive health care for all New Mexicans. As reproductive health care gets increasingly difficult to access across the country, New Mexico continues to protect and expand access to care and gender equity in our state. We have some of the best laws related to reproductive healthcare and gender equity in the country, including pregnancy and gender discrimination protection, easier contraception access, and abortion access. But many New Mexicans still have a difficult time accessing reproductive health care and experience discrimination based on gender, sex, and pregnancy across the state. We know that anti-reproductive health care politicians shouldn't get in the way of New Mexicans getting their health care, and we will continue to fight for the rights of all New Mexicans to have autonomy, to have a child, not have a child, and to parent the children that they do have with dignity and safety. We will continue to work to protect access to reproductive health care, gender equity through proactive rights advocacy. We will also support criminal legal reform and immigrant rights as key pieces of our reproductive justice in New Mexico. And with that, passing it to Naomi. Oh, Naomi, you are muted.
Sorry, this is my first time being on Zoom. I guess it's both of ours, Dakota. All right, so now we have another trivia question for you. This one is repro related. In 2017, over 90% of counties in New Mexico had no healthcare facilities that provided abortion care. True or false? All right, and the answer is true. 82% of folks got that one right. Travel distance is an important factor of access to health services, including abortion care. And in 2016, the decision of the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of the United States in Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt, I'm sure I botched that, upheld the increased driving distances that can contribute to an undue burden on access to abortion care. And in rural states like ours, obviously, this just exacerbates the existing challenges that folks are already facing with resources, travel costs, transportation, things like that. So this is why it's so important for all of us to continue to work on access for abortion care. There is still plenty of work to be done in our state, though we have made some really incredible wins in the recent years. So that was sort of an astounding statistic to me. 90% of our counties, very, very limited access. With that, we will be going to our next section, which is Nia, who will be updating us on some of our work in immigrant rights.
Thank you, Naomi. The ACLU of New Mexico has engaged in efforts to defend the civil liberties of immigrants and immigrant communities for many years. Partly because we maintain an office in Las Cruces, we have particularly focused our attention on programs designed to limit the militarization of the southern border region of our state. The Trump administration's overt hostility to immigrant communities generated a new urgency in this work that unfortunately has not subsided with the Biden administration. The ACLU of New Mexico is committed to rising to the challenge to resist any policy that hurts immigrants in our state. During the 2021 legislative session, the ACLU of New Mexico worked to protect immigrants through two very important bills: a privacy bill that would protect all New Mexicans' sensitive personal information from being shared with law enforcement agencies without a warrant, and a bill that would end private detention in New Mexico. The sensitive personal information bill passed both chambers before being pocket vetoed by the governor, unfortunately, and we're still working on getting that back. The bill calling for an end to private prisons passed two committees before it was tabled in the House Appropriations and Finance Committee. We will continue to reach out to legislators to protect everyone's sensitive personal information and to end the use of private prisons in New Mexico. The COVID-19 pandemic has heightened awareness of the conditions that people in detention continue to experience, both in criminal and immigration detention. The ACLU of New Mexico has sued the government on behalf of detained individuals who have experienced inhumane treatment, including a lack of enforcement of basic COVID-safe practices. With our local partners, the ACLU of New Mexico is continuing to advocate to end all private prisons in New Mexico. We are also working on a campaign asking President Biden to fulfill his promise of ending Trump's most harmful immigration policies that continue to hurt people seeking help at our border and in our community. Our main asks right now are calling for an end to Title 42, a public health regulation that prevents people from seeking asylum in the United States, and secondly, restoring a humane asylum process that was decimated during the prior administration. Although immigration is a federal issue, we're calling on our local elected officials to support programs that provide safe and humane welcoming centers here in our communities.
Thank you so much, Nia. Next trivia question is asylum related. And the question is, in what year was the right to seek asylum established in US law? 1833, 2000, 1980, or 1492? I feel a little bit like Alex Trebek tonight, so I'm going to enjoy that. Let's give folks another few seconds before we pop up our results. All right. right, some mixed answers on this one. So the right to seek asylum in US law was actually established in 1980, and that was through the Refugee Act, and it adopted key provisions of the Geneva Convention, which established the right to seek asylum in international law after World War II. So important to note here that asylum is both established in US and international law, which is why it's so important. Thank you everybody for participating in that one. And next we will take it back to Elaine and Baron. But before I do that, just want to note that if you all have questions along the way, please put them in the Q&A down below, and we will make sure and get to them during that portion of the training, and really appreciate your participation. So we'll make sure and get to your questions if you just type them in there. And Baron, Elaine, if you want to go ahead and take it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the ACLU of New Mexico's criminal legal system reform work revolves around challenging the rampant racism in the state's criminal justice system, increasing police accountability to lessen the incidence of police violence, reducing mass incarceration that disproportionately impact our Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous communities, and most recently, eliminating criminal justice system fines and fees that lead to folks going in and out of jail for failure to pay court order fines and fees. And we know how that cycle is so disruptive. The majority of the work will be done through the New Mexico Safe Coalition. And that coalition, for those of you who all aren't familiar, came together in 2016 when the then Governor Susana Martinez put the death penalty, tried to reintroduce the death penalty through a special session. And all of that special session, the death penalty didn't fly. It led to, the voting records were put on mailers and sort of targeted some of our elected officials during that time. And so the New Mexico Safe Coalition came about so we can just sort of change how we talk about crime and public safety and sort of run things through a rubric that sort of determines whether or not it's safe, apolitical, fiscally responsible, evidence-based, and evidence-based, whether it's safe. And so, despite the challenges the challenges created by the rising crime rates in our town and upcoming election year redistricting will present, we are working with the coalition to introduce a few of the bills that were stranded during last year's session. For some reason, they didn't get out of committee. So we're going to be working with them. And so far this interim, we have been afforded multiple opportunities to get in front of the Courts, Corrections, and Justice Interim Committee to sort of talk about what we would like to see and hopefully get them to buy in despite the drumbeat of crime all the time on our evening news. And so far, we're working to really sort of, try to get our elected officials and policymakers to move away from the punitive approaches and start really focusing some effort on investing in addressing the underlying causes of crime and public safety, such as mental health treatment and addiction services. For those of you all on the call who've been around New Mexico, you all know that in 2012, our behavioral health system was sort of upended, and we lost a lot of providers, and our state has never really got out of that there. So we're working on several fronts to encourage our elected officials to invest in those things. And then I'll turn it over to, but the last thing is that, the work we're doing, before I turn it over to Elaine to talk about our police accountability work, we need to really sort of get into things that lead to the drivers of incarceration, right? And so we are hopeful that we will be able to pass a probation and parole reform bill that addresses the crisis with technical violations, filling up our prisons and jails. The LFC just released a report in July that showed approximately 1/3 of the people admitted to our prisons are there for technical violations, which means they either missed an appointment or failed a drug screening. And so one thing, like when we talk about our reproductive health work, we're surrounded by states in that arena that sort of want to, restrict individuals' access to those services and care. But those states it's just opposite. Those states, Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, are far above, surpass New Mexico in their efforts to reform their criminal legal system. And what those states have started to see is that while they have been able to reduce the number of people in their prisons and jails, they have also been able to see a decrease in certain crimes. At least that was before this last year. And what we're experiencing in Mexico is happening all over the nation. But I better be quiet and let Elaine take it over.
Yeah, thanks, Baron. So I'm going to cover our police accountability work. Since the start of the Fatal Force database by the Washington Post in 2015, New Mexico has alternated between having the highest and second highest rate of police killings in the country every year. In the state of New Mexico, officers can use deadly force even when it's not necessary. Deadly force can be used without exhausting de-escalation tactics and other non-lethal alternatives. So this has resulted in many New Mexicans' lives being lost needlessly at the hands of those who took an oath to protect and serve them. Police accountability is a key component to effective constitutional policing. However, it is fundamentally lacking. Over the years, we have witnessed the result of this imbalance, from unlawful use of force incidents that have resulted in the needless deaths and great bodily harm of New Mexicans, and the lack of consequences that follow those actions. So law enforcement officials are one of the few careers that have the authority to take a life. We have entrusted them with this power without having a balance of accountability. We know that police accountability is not police accountability is not only a deterrent to brutality and misconduct, but it also builds the public's trust, and it sets a solid foundation for law enforcement. The ACLU of New Mexico is dedicated to ending the needless loss of life by law enforcement by adding increased transparency and accountability through life-saving reforms. We want New Mexico to no longer be known for leading in the nation for loss of life at the hands of police, but rather leading in the nation for passing meaningful life-saving reform. The heart of this push to reform the police is rooted in preventing lives from being lost needlessly and tragically at the hands of police. We have an opportunity to turn the tide and end the needless loss of life. So we are calling on legislators to pass meaningful police reforms that saves lives and sets a solid foundation for law enforcement. I'm going to pass it over to Maggie now so she can go over our work around fines and fees and how that impacts our communities.
Thanks, Elaine. Yes, these dreadful fines and fees. Fees are everywhere, but when they're attached to a fine, it can have devastating consequences for some people. Really quickly, a fine is designed to act as a deterrent and punishment, right, when you break the law. Fees solely, their primary purpose is to generate revenue to fund the courts and other government entities. So going back to fines and fees, the Department of Justice in 2014 went into Ferguson, Missouri, right? And what they found when they were looking at everything that happened, that municipalities use fines and fees to prey upon low-income people, that they in fact do not promote public safety, and then also that they are primarily using fees to generate public revenue. And I want to focus on the generate revenue because later, that was in 2014 and 2018, the Brennan Center for Justice came and studied New Mexico, 3 counties, Bernalillo, Santa Fe, and Socorro. And what they found was that, in fact, they do not generate revenue. And again, it does not promote public safety. They found that Bernalillo County here, they lose 15 cents to every dollar, a nickel and a dime every dollar. Socorro and Santa Fe County, they both wrote off uncollected debt at a higher rate than what they collected. So these two studies just came and showed us that fines and fees are unreliable, and they also prey upon our low-income people through, sorry. So, oh my God, sorry, I'm like freezing. So they confirm that it's unreliable and an inefficient way to generate revenue. And again, it does not promote public safety. And these fines attached, they could be anywhere from administrative fees, court fees, restitution, and then also just the fine itself. Really quickly, I want to think back to a moment where it's you're super nervous when you see the red and blue lights in your review mirror, and you think, oh my God, I can't afford this ticket. I know I did. And for some people, this has life consequences. This could lead to, you can't pay the ticket. So then it accumulates more fines and fees. It can lead to your loss of driver's license, which means a loss of job and a way to take your kids to school. And this just has a domino effect for some people. And then when you can't pay, it just keeps collecting, like at the grocery store. It just keeps adding up and adding up and adding up. And what we're doing right now, the practice is that when you can't pay, you may end up in jail or you lose your license. So what we're seeing is that this is creating a two-tier system where people can be arrested and jailed for being poor. And those who have means can walk away unharmed. And what we are trying to do here at the ACLU, we are devoted to advance and change policies regarding the following. So we no longer want to see this practice of suspending someone's license for court-based debt or failure to appear. We also do not want people to end the practice of jailing people for overdue fines and fees. And then also to waive the $27 fee that comes when your license is suspended. And then also to stop imposing penalties for late or missed payments from the fines, fees, and court debt. And also you can refer back to our guide, and this goes into more in depth. I got a little shaky, excuse me, and I will pass it, with that said, I will pass it to Naomi. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maggie and Baron and Elaine, for those important updates. I want to take it to another fact check here. So this one is regarding mass incarceration. This one was a little bit astounding to me. About how many people in New Mexico are currently incarcerated? Options are 5,000, 27,000, 1,600, or 18,000. I'm so interested to see what folks said to this one. All right. So about an even split here. 44% of people guessed 27,000 and 50% of people guessed 18,000. The correct answer is 18,000. So according to the Prison Policy Initiative, between state prisons, local jails, federal jail, and our incarcerated youth, we have a higher incarceration rate per capita in New Mexico than in the rest of the country. So just to give you a little bit of perspective here, the population of Deming, New Mexico is around 15,000. So we're looking at an entire town in New Mexico that is currently incarcerated. So a lot of work to be done in the criminal legal space. And we appreciate you all staying involved thus far. So I think at this point, we're going to go ahead and move forward with really digging into the meat and potatoes of the training. Once again, thank you all for joining and sticking with us. It might also be helpful for folks to open up the guide that was put in the chat and just sort of follow along. As I mentioned earlier, please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A, and we will get to those in just a little while. So, excuse me, with that, I will send it to Dakota.
Hi, everybody. So now we're going to jump into the actual training element. And as a lot of you saw with our advertisement, we wanted to talk about the interim legislative session. During the regular sessions in New Mexico, legislators are often incredibly busy working for constituents and distracted with events, commitments, and all the politics that go on during this time. This can make it difficult for activists to have meaningful conversations with them. They are often in a rush and don't have much time for in-depth dialogue or conversations. This is especially true during the final frantic week of the legislative session. For this reason, New Mexico legislature has what is called an interim period. This interim period extends roughly from May to December every year. During the interim period, legislators have much more time to talk to their constituents. They tend to be more relaxed and more open to different perspectives. It is during this time that you can have a deeper, more intimate conversation with them about the issues that matter most. Now, you may be wondering, why is the interim period so important? The interim period sets the tone for the upcoming session. It's a time when legislators expect to hear from activists like yourselves on what is important to you, your family, and your communities. The various committees will hear and debate legislative proposals for the upcoming session and beyond. New Mexico legislative session spans over the course of 2 years. The first year occurs in odd number years and lasts 60 days. So this year we had what we call a longer session, and it is that 60-day session. During that 60-day period, any type of legislation can be introduced. The second year of the session occurs on even number years and is 30 days. The 30 days, or the short session, is reduced to budgetary issues and anything the governor sees as important that she marks needs to be dealt with that legislative session. And that is the only way that non-budgetary bills will be heard during the budgetary session. The New Mexico legislature convenes at noon on the third Tuesday at the Roundhouse. Most of the interim committees are held in Santa Fe and Albuquerque and other parts of the state. But because of COVID, they are doing a hybrid approach. They're meeting in person and virtual. Instructions for how to participate in the online interim committees can be found in the toolkit, which was shared in the chat. And once I'm done talking, I will share it again so everyone has access to it as well. So as you can see on the screen, in red, there is a whole giant list of legislative committees for the interim session. The most important committees for the ACLU and our issue areas are Courts, Corrections, and Justice, Criminal Justice Reform Subcommittee, Legislative Health and Human Services, and the Legislative Finance Committee. It is about roughly halfway through the legislative session, the interim session. We are quickly coming up on the end. As we come up on the end, legislators are going to start to get busier and busier due to the regular legislative session happening so soon. So we really recommend that once you are done with this training and you get all of our resources and use the guide and toolkit, you start to try and attend these meetings as soon as you can, just due to the fact that everything is coming quickly to an end. And I am going to kick it to Mia to talk about why connecting with legislators is so important.
Yes, so during the legislative session, lawmakers are extremely busy. They're often rushing, from one meeting to another, and they don't have as much time to talk. And this is especially true towards the end of a session. And then not to mention trying to reach legislators during this remote session, everything with COVID has made contact so much more difficult. This past session was particularly difficult at the end because even sending emails, their inboxes or they're not reviewing emails on any on any kind of a schedule. Their voicemails are full, and I mean it's really difficult to get a hold of them. So during the interim time, they have a lot more time to be able to communicate with their constituents. And you can also right now have much deeper and more intimate and meaningful conversations with your legislator about the issues that are most important to you. So before the interim period is the best time to plant seeds for the issues that are important for you that you want them to vote on during the next session. So for example, I scheduled a meeting a couple of weeks ago with Senator Carrie Hamblin. Now she is not my senator, I'm in a different district, but it was something that I really wanted to talk to her about some ACLU priorities and kind of get her a temperature check from her, right, on how she's, viewing these issues. I had a feeling, but, I just wanted to confirm how she felt. So, I sent her an email and, she was perfectly willing to meet with me. And I talked about some ACLU priorities that were really important. Now I'm kind of functioning obviously from a staff perspective and, but I mean, the thing is that our legislators are there for all of us. And so I wanted to share, the concerns that we have and the bills that we're thinking about and also get her take. And it was really interesting just because we had the time. It wasn't the rushing from, trying to catch somebody while they're sneaking off to the bathroom or something. We had an opportunity to just sit down and have a long conversation about the priorities and talk about what we, and her perspective and where we have agreement, and also some of the bills that she's looking at moving and saying, hey, is this something that the ACLU might be able to help me with, and getting your membership on board with. So that was a really great way to connect with her, and that's something that's available to everybody. And so the best way is get a hold of them before the session. You talk to them or email them. Many of them have their cell phones and their office numbers, their landlines posted, and so you can call them and leave messages. And so that this is something that it's a little scary in the beginning, but you want to keep talking to them, keep those lines of communication. It doesn't matter if it's your own representative or senator. It's also really good to talk to all of them, and whether or not they're usually on your side, it's important for them to hear from you. That's the most, they, and from several people. So let's see. And so with that, I will pass it back to Naomi.
Thank you so much, Nia, and thank you, Dakota, as well. A couple of quick points to touch on. One, I think Dakota may have misspoke that this was a long session coming up. We're actually entering a short session. So that drastically changes the approach and what's doable, as she went into. So just want to note that getting involved at this point is all the more important for that reason, because we have limited time and limited opportunity. Also, if you are interested in getting involved, just a reminder that the contact information for our organizers is listed in the guide, and you can always reach out to us on our website as well if you're interested in learning more about how to engage with your legislators over the remainder of the interim. Next, I will be sending it to Barron, Elaine, and Maggie, who will be talking about one of the most important tools for talking to legislators, and that is telling your story. Barron, you want to take it?
Thank you so much for that, Naomi. Interacting with legislators, especially as we mentioned during the interim period, it's also more about building relationships, right? And ideally, these will be, long-term relationships that we can sort of tap into as we work to improve the lives for our fellow New Mexicans. And several of you all on the call have helped us with this in the past. You all have helped us, pass solitary confinement reform bills and bills to ban things like ban the box and expungement of criminal records. So your voices have been super helpful as we sort of change the landscape here in New Mexico. The most effective advocates tells persuasive stories, right? And so I'm gonna ask a few questions, just little rhetorical questions. Like we sort of tap into our experiences when we do this. Have you ever had experience with crime? Have you or someone you know been a victim of crime? Have you been involved with the criminal legal system in any way? When talking to legislators, it's super important to talk about the specifics of policy and research. But even more important is to humanize and personalize your conversations with these elected officials so they can actually feel why these issues matter to you most. However, when we have these conversations, and some of you all heard me say this many times before, it's super important that we be mindful of how we talk about crime and public safety. And I would just like to sort of give the tip of always using people first language, right? I know doing my line of work, right, and working with a bunch of folks, defense attorneys and things like that, folks often just sort of reverberate back to the, go back to the sort of harmful language, felon and things like that. And so I often try to, refer to people as homeless when there are folks living without shelter, because we need to, sort of humanize these issues. And the criminal legal system world is far behind the disability rights and the immigrants' rights world, where they have adopted this type of first-person language and totally embrace it. Also, it's important, especially with the realities that we face here in New Mexico, and these conversations, is really important to acknowledge that there is a spike in crime, for lack of a better term. I mean, there's really no way of getting around that. But also to be really steadfast and let our elected people know that we can incarcerate ourselves out of the issue, right? I mean, Naomi just went over some figures for incarceration, but this is something we've been doing for 100 years now, right? We've been just sort of thinking we can lock people up and solve the problem. So it's really important to highlight that when you get to speak with your elected officials, and also to remind them of what the reality is on the ground for many folks in the state. New Mexico is a historically poor state that struggles with substance abuse disorder issues, primarily basically because no other way to say it, but government neglect over the years and lack of investments in communities, right? And so we need to sort of hone our conversations to offer up generative solutions that could help our elected officials sort of move the needle away from this punitive approach to a little bit more humane approach. And I'm going to pass it to you, Elaine, so you can talk a little bit about the storytelling itself.
Yeah, thank you, Baron. So telling your story is just one of many ways that you can get involved and advocate for policies that will improve the lives of you and your loved ones. So I came to this work through a tragedy. In 2019, my sister's life was taken while she was in the middle of a mental health crisis by 3 deputies. Instead of her getting the help that she needed, that resulted in the deputies taking her life, that call did. So following her death, I began reaching out to legislators to make her story known. It was important for me to make her story real to legislators and to highlight specific asks to prevent other families from enduring what my family is going through. Her story helped get 2 bills passed that add some transparency and accountability where it was missing in policing. Legislators passed the body-worn camera mandate and the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. Now, I share my story to highlight the real value of sharing your story? Well, telling your story can be healing. It can also cause you to relive trauma and causing additional harm. It is a lived experience that on some days you may not be okay with sharing. It is important that you avoid re-traumatizing yourself when telling your story. So in telling your story, you are the one who decides what is going to be shared, how it's going to be shared, and when it's going to be shared. So I'll be passing it over to Miss Maggie now so she can go over some do's and don'ts.
Thanks, Elaine. And I also just wanted to thank you for coming to our work and your daily reminder of why we're here and how far we still need to go. And just thanks for always being positive, even just after the horrible thing that happened, you know, and for sharing your story. And I know it's not easy sometimes, so thank you. But going back to some do's and don'ts when we're talking to legislators, when you're sharing your stories or ideas or concerns, we want to remind you to be yourself. You aren't supposed to be an expert. You're a constituent who deserves to be heard. Legislators represent us and rely on feedback from us every day, from everyday New Mexicans. So here are a few tips, do's and don'ts to keep in mind when you meet them. When you meet somebody new, you want to introduce yourself, identify yourself, brief introduction, and then also be cognizant and be respectful. Sometimes we get excited or we're really passionate about our issues, like what I did earlier. Ugh. So remain a calm composure, and then do show some appreciation, and also to be slow to criticize, and actively listen. If you can, do some research and provide those points, and then also if you can incorporate your personal story. And like Nia said earlier, they're pretty busy, so being concise and to the point is really helpful, and also to keep the door open for further discussion. And some don'ts: don't be argumentative, rude, or threatening, because that's not good. We're all people here. Don't overwhelm them with too much data, because it might just go whoop. And then lastly, if you don't know the answer, don't make it up, and communicate with them that you will find the answer and circle back with them with the correct information. And I'll pass it to Naomi.
Can I add something there? I just want to jump in and say, Maggie qualified and said, if you can do the research. I would just say, do the research, because as many of you know, some of our elected officials can sort of be unpleasant at times, maybe, and if they're having a bad day, they probably take that as an opportunity to try to grill you or be goofy. So I say, yeah, just take that extra time to really do that research.
Thanks for that, Baron. I think my favorite aspect of all of this is the storytelling, and just remembering that it's our stories that humanize us, and that our legislators are human too. And while it is important to go in knowing where you stand and be prepared to have a conversation, it's also just as important to show up and be vulnerable and put yourself in those situations, because that's what holds our government accountable. So and recognize that if you get involved in any of our asks, when we ask you to show up to a meeting or provide public comment or anything like that, we always try to support you with some talking points, a little bit of context, and we try and engage as much as possible beforehand to make sure that folks are feeling comfortable and ready to go in and do that important work. So appreciate you all speaking to that very much. And with that, we are going to move on to some Q&A. So I see that some of our staff has been answering questions as they've been popping into the chat. But we would love to just take a few minutes and open it up for anybody to type in questions, and we'll kick it to the appropriate staff member. So I'll just give it a couple of minutes here.
And maybe if it's okay, I probably can go back and revisit a couple of the questions that were answered and asked in the chat.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I believe one of the questions we had was if ACLU or if there is any work being done by counties and municipal leagues to train folks up on the impacts of the Civil Rights Act and how that's going to play out in the courts. Baron, you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, well, I hope the Association of Counties aren't training folks on the impact, because they're full of misinformation while we're debating and working that bill through the process. But I've heard, and don't quote me on this, but I believe the Municipal League and the Association of Counties are working with working with the counties, their respective constituents, to educate them on how this bill should play out. And I think, as many folks know, the ACLU's legal director and legal team has worked with some of the civil rights attorneys to do the continuing legal education seminars on the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. And there's a few, I believe a few folks in the mix are working to sort of, I don't want to use the term educate the bench, but to sort of, I don't know, have conversations with our district judges across the state, letting them know that it is okay to be brave and courageous when it comes to interpreting this law, as opposed to falling back on some of the things that have happened on the federal level. But I think now that sort of COVID is easing up, that's something to look a little bit deeper into on our side, on our advocacy guide, to sort of educate the public about that in general altogether. Because as many of you all know, our New Mexico Bill of Rights is much stronger than the federal Bill of Rights. Like, we are an Equal Rights Amendment state, so there's protections in our Bill of Rights that they don't have on a federal level. So this bill is really a superstar for the state and the people of New Mexico.
Thank you, Baron. And I'm not seeing any other questions pop in. We did get one about the ACLU's involvement in the Metro Crime Initiative that Mayor Teller in Albuquerque just launched this past month. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, we've attended those meetings, and I have an invite to one right now, but we have not really dug too deep into that work. However, we are working with APD4, the coalition that sort of is working around policing. And as I mentioned, we're working with the city's policy department to sort of address a few things, right? How the city of Albuquerque handle encampment suites of folks who are living without housing. See, I'm trying to correct my language on the spot, right? And then we're working with the city to sort of see about some equity in the marijuana revenue. But yeah, so I'm aware of what's going on with the crime initiative, but I have not, sort of participated, except for on the peripheral.
Yeah, thank you, Baron, and thank you for mentioning the work that we're doing with APD Forward. So it's been a long-term and effort with really no end in sight. So appreciate the work you all have done on that. We did get a question. Nia, I think I will kick this one to you. If you were prepared to talk a little bit about what we can do to make private prisons a thing of the past here in New Mexico. So Will had a question in the chat. Nia?
Okay, yeah, so I'm reading it right now. Is this the, let's see, could we make cruel prisons and jails too expensive to operate in New Mexico? That's actually, that is certainly one tax. They already are, right? So we actually, they are incredibly expensive. They're not paying, the tax that they're supposed to be paying. There's definitely some questions around the bonds, in like Otero County, facilities. And so that's certainly one way that we're looking at. That one other approach is just to say, hey, you know what? Not if our census counts in the detention centers are so low that they cease to have a purpose. I mean, they then, you know, they would have to close down because it would make no sense to have a prison with only, you know, a handful of people, right? So, I mean, that's definitely one way that that we've been looking at, but you know, there's definitely, I mean, there's a thought of yeah, fines. How can you make prisons so difficult that, or, you know, especially the private ones generally. And I think that's obviously one of the difficulties too, is with the pure abolitionist perspective. That's a tension and a consideration for a different talk. But when it comes to private prisons, and especially looking at it from a state and a federal level, because a lot of our facilities here are housing, you know, immigrants and are for ICE detention, and they're all private. So if we can get the Biden administration, they've already said that they're going to stop using private prisons for the Bureau of Prisons, which is criminal court, pressuring the Biden administration to stop using private contractors for ICE detention. That eliminates the need for this form of detention, and looking at, when it comes to immigrant detention, alternatives to having people in custody who really should not be in custody. So thank you for that question, Will. And yes, that's definitely one tactic at eliminating private prisons here in New Mexico.
And if I just chime in real quick, because I just had a harebrained scheme the other day. You know, every time they talk about closing private prisons, and I think Will, you've probably been in the room, because I know Tom worked on that bill during the session, right? And every time they talk about it, they're all like, "Well, this is gonna be our jobs. This is gonna be our jobs," and I'm like, it sort of drives me bonkers that there's folks in this and our neighbors and friends and families that are willing to keep a prison operating and have people under humane conditions so they can employ folks. But I was thinking that, you know, I think we need to, because first of all, several prisons are starting to change hand on the state side because they're having issues, you know, and despite the numbers Naomi just read about, our prison population, we're seeing a sort of a decline over time, right? And so this means that they're like the prison in Santa Rosa is reverting back to the state's care, right? Because they can't keep up with the bed mandate. So I think sometime down the line, it would be nice if we can do it through, I don't know, just sheer advocacy and use our PREA knowledge to close down the prison in Hobbs where they can't argue that you know, is going to take jobs away. Also, you know, there was also an LFC report that said that the Department of Corrections, New Mexico Corrections Department, have been using have been sort of what am I trying to say? They've been exaggerating their classification levels, right? And so they, you know, so a lot of these people could be genuinely classified in lower prison facilities and would lessen the need for those two behemoths in Hobbs and Santa Rosa. But yeah, I think that's something we really have to hone down in on. And I don't know if I made any sense at anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you both. I think touching on some of the really big challenges in working on this issue. You know, private prisons being an economic cornerstone for some of these communities is a real problem in our state. And so, you know, we're working to reimagine those types of things. I also appreciate some of the comments in the chat. Melissa, you're absolutely right that incarceration, mass incarceration creates a cyclical and generational trauma, and really important that we break that cycle. So appreciate everybody's engagement on that question very much. We did have a question from Karen regarding redistricting, asking if the ACLU is going to be involved in redistricting, and if so, how you can help. So the answer is yes. The ACLU has been involved in some of the redistricting process here in a couple of ways. Our Indigenous Justice team has been working with tribes and pueblos to make sure that their interests are represented in the redistricting commission meetings. And we've also been working to inform the public of when those meetings are happening, provide talking points, and generate turnout. So similar to what we've been talking about in the interim legislative committees, same concept. You can get involved by participating in any one of those meetings. So if you'd like, after this, feel free to email me. I will drop my email in the chat here, and we will make sure that you are on the list next time we send out one of those invites to get involved. And we also try to we work really closely with our partners who are working on this issue in a much more involved way than we are currently, to make sure that we have regional specific talking points. So I live here in CD2, Karen, and certainly understand the pain of not having a representative that represents your values. So we definitely want to work on that. And with that, I will move to our next question, which is from Larissa. Larissa asked, what are some of the specific alternatives to policing and incarceration that the ACLU of New Mexico is advocating for? And I will let Barron and Elaine take this one.
Alrighty. I think, I think, overall, Larissa, the goal would be to sort of reduce the role of policing in the state of New Mexico, and that can take one of many forms. We're exploring the possibilities of working to pass some sort of legislation, probably on the local level, that would remove traffic stops away from armed police officers. That could be one alternative. And we can, let me be quiet. Go ahead, Elaine. I'm talking way too much. Elaine, go jump in there, Elaine. Excuse me.
Yeah, I would say something that we really do want to see passed eventually is going to be a use of force reform that would set clear, really, it would set like a roadmap to success, hopefully for officers, on when it's appropriate for them to use force. As I mentioned earlier, officers can pretty much take a life at this moment in time, and just say that they and really have no grounds to do it. And so we really want to put a stop to that through getting a use of force legislation implemented. You wanted to add anything else, Barron, that we're kind of working on?
Yeah. But the answer to the question, alternatives to policing would be the expansion of the community safety program department to push the mayor and administration and future administrations to fully invest in that program, and to devise plans and mechanisms to really reduce the role of that policing, role of police, right? And also, as far as the incarceration we're working to decriminalize simple possession, defelonize simple possession, because that is also a large driver of incarceration in the state, right? And that money it would save gazillions of dollars, right? The law office of the public defender did a really excellent presentation at one of the interim committees, just highlighting how many people, I think in some places like Hobbs and places in southeastern New Mexico, on any given day, 37 and 38% of the cases are for simple possession. So if we stop that, that would really stem incarceration in the state and free up millions of dollars to reinvest in programs that address underlying causes of crime. And then the technical violation things, right? We really, and I think we may be there. And this will, if we do it this upcoming session, because there's a serious appetite for it, we will be bringing it into another multi-year campaign to end incarceration for technical violations, right? We need to stop locking people up for exhibiting signs of substance abuse disorder, which has been recognized as a disease and a public health crisis. So those are some of the things. But the policing, right, is and also we want to sometime work in the future to reduce the power of our police union, and especially the largest union in the state of New Mexico, because police unions, right, unlike other municipal unions, they provide, protections and make sure people have good benefits and not, tread upon by their employer. But these we have things in our laws commonly referred to as the Bill of Rights that really restrict how an investigation is conducted. And once we do some of that, take away some of that power, we'll be able to usher in some serious reforms and reshape policing in the state of New Mexico. And I'm long-winded, I'm sorry.
So that was fantastic. Both of you, thank you so much for answering that question. And I think the thing to really highlight there is there's plenty of opportunity. And there are a number of organizations along with the ACLU that have really had success in reimagining how we can repair some of the systems that are harming our folks every day. So once again, if you'd like to get involved, please email the organizers listed in the guide, reach out to us over the website. We'd love to hear from you one-on-one and really talk about how you can take the next step in your advocacy journey. And with that, I'm going to kick it to Maggie.
Thanks, Naomi. The past few years have been incredibly divisive and difficult, but somehow we found inspiration in our country too. As racism, xenophobia, misogyny, and discrimination have once again risen to the surface, people have united to tackle these issues on a deeper level than ever before. The mission of dismantling systems of oppression have been continually re-energized and is becoming a much more inclusive and equitable effort. We know that there's still a lot of work to do, and it is imperative that we each do our part. While it is easy to feel consumed by the national headlines and international turmoil, we have the most impact right here at home. The battle to fight for big, lasting systemic change must be fought at the local level and the state level too. Holding our own elected officials accountable and remaining engaged in the process to create policies is how we will change our world one win at a time. Here in New Mexico, we have the potential to pass legislation that protects civil liberties and strengthens our rights, leading the way for other states to do the same, like abolishing fees. And with that, I'm going to kick it to Dakota. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so the final part is, what can you do now? Connect with your legislator. So if you don't know who your legislator is, you can find out who they are. There is a step-by-step instruction in the guide that you can use to find out who they are, as well as their contact information. Connect with your legislator. Visit the Roundhouse, tell it to the governor, and stay tuned for urgent action. You can use the information that we have provided to determine what points you would like to make. What's even more important is that you explain why a particular policy matters to you on a personal level. So think back to that share your story element. How can you build your story into your conversation with your legislator? Have you had a family member had access to reproductive health care? Have you been a survivor of crime, but recognize that people with conviction records need support in I'm so sorry, in reintegrating into our communities? Are you or a friend an undocumented immigrant living in fear of Trump's America? Tell your legislator about that. It matters. They will listen to you, and just remember to always be polite. Tune into the interim committees. We have shared the list of what they are, and then stay tuned for urgent calls to action. We are constantly sending out calls to action through social media, email, text, to mobilize active advocates in support of our legislative priorities. As the bill comes up in committee or as they reach the full House or Senate floor vote, we'll send you a note with instructions on how to raise the pressure on legislators to vote for the priority bills or against in slew of bad legislation. I'm sure a lot of you heard about this through social media, so just make sure to keep your eyes open and your inbox, check your inbox for ACLU notifications. Sometimes they go to spam, so check your spam folder every once in a while. And Naomi, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thanks so much, Dakota. And with that, we just have one final question, and we just want to know how we did here. We're really thankful for everybody tuning in and sticking with us for an hour and a half, and appreciate the feedback very much. We worked hard to make sure that there was some good content in here and that everybody got something out of your time with us. So once again, just really appreciative for your care and your concern on these issues. And we hope to connect with you all soon. So we will not be putting the results of the poll up, but just if you want to go ahead and answer, and we'll end it with that tonight.
Naomi, I wanted to make one final point. So
Sure.
We did share the toolkit. That toolkit includes talking points from each of our issue areas, some legal updates, our advocacy guide, how to tell your story document, and instructions on how to get into those committees, find out who your legislators are, and so much more. You all should have received an email from me earlier today with the link for that, as well as the link is already in the chat, but we will be sending a follow-up email from this event to everyone who RSVP'd with that link and advocacy guide that you will be able to access.
Perfect. Very important information. Thank you for catching that. And with that, we will sign off. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank
Stay
you
safe.
all.